So let's talk about the battle line of the Blood God. With lower strength but boosted movement, bigger blood surge, and 20-man units, how strong are Khorne Berzerkers looking in the World Eaters Codex? Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking World Eaters and in particular Khorne Berzerkers for this video, doing a unit overview of the squad, briefly talking about their lore and models, then doing a unit overview for the squad, looking over their character options and the full updated rules for the Berzerker Warband in the Codex, which probably does feel like it's going to be the best detachment for them with the big damage buffs it gives them. In the lore, Khorne Berzerkers have been a staple since the early days of Warhammer 40k, basically the shock elite foot troops of the World Eaters Chaos Space Marine Legion. Space Marines afflicted by the Butcher's Nails, giving them augmented strength and augmented aggression, utterly dedicated to their patron deity, with their sole purpose in life all about taking lives for Khorne, shedding blood, claiming the skulls of great enemy champions, and to have a wave of Khorne Berzerkers unleashed on an enemy battle line is to stand against a storm of chain axe fury. Models wise, this is their miniature kit. You get 10 of them in a box for £42, €55 or $65 from Games Workshop. I feel like as Warhammer kits go, the 10-man Space Marine box sets at least tend to be slightly better value versus some of Games Workshop's other offerings. At least you get a fair amount of plastic and usually points on the board as well. A lot of World Eaters players will probably have good numbers of them in their collections. They are pretty much the most iconic unit in the army. And also you got really good numbers of them in the past Combat Patrol box set. 20 of them there alongside a Lord and some Jackals. And they do appear in the new Combat Patrol box set as well, though just 10 of them in that one. The models I think were generally really quite well received. Khorne Berzerkers are a pretty iconic and well liked unit in the game, though had absolutely ancient models for a really long time. Games Workshop released Khorne the Betrayer on his own towards the end of 7th edition, I think it was, but then the World Eaters had to wait another couple of editions for their actual unique model line to come out. I feel like the miniatures are pretty good, lots of Khornate iconography, a good sense of motion of a whole bunch of them, and a nice variety of different chain weapons. A few of them dispense with their arm guards to show off their bulging muscles, and for kit options, a couple of them have the choice to be armed with some heavy chain glaives, giving them a bit more muscle against heavier infantry and tough stuff, and you can take a few plasma pistols in the unit. In 10th edition, I'd say they've been in the realm of being kind of usable but not really stand out for the World Eaters. Maybe often competitive lists taking say one unit in a Rhino with a character leader, perhaps a Master of Executions with a Berzerker glaive. I feel like there's been a bit more emphasis on things like Jackals and 8-bound and Angron in more recent competitive lists at least. In any case, things seem to have changed for them in quite a big way now. If you were looking to pick up some World Eaters goodness, whether it's Khorne Berzerkers or other things, feel free to check out the channel discount retailers linked down in the video description. These ones save somewhere between 10 and 20% compared with Games Workshop's prices depending on where you are in the world, and if you buy through these specific ones, then a bit goes to help support Auspex Tactics. Here are the pre-order times for the World Eaters releases over the weekend. Probably worth being early if you want to have some sort of chance of getting the big Battle Force box set at discount. The World Eaters one is the one with all the 8-bound, though hopefully there should be better supply of the Combat Patrols. As ever, a big thank you to anyone supporting the channel via those ones. Let's take a look at their datasheet though, and prior to the Codex update, Khorne Berzerkers cost 90 points for 5 of them, or 180 for 10. In the Codex they're printed at either 180 or 360, and that's because you can now field them only in squads of either 10 or 20, you can no longer field them in 5s apparently. Seems that if you want to go absolutely mad heavy on Khorne Berzerkers, you could now field 120 of them in an army list if you'd like to. Though I guess at 2,000 points, it'd be 110 and 1 character if you wanted a crazy Berzerker Warband. Feels a bit of a shame to lose the option of fielding them in 5s if you just wanted a cheap escort for a character perhaps. Looks like they're going to be locked into a role as a bit more of a higher investment sort of damage dealer, objective skirmish type unit now, which I'm maybe not sure is the absolute best for them when they're competing against 8-bound. 20-man Berzerker squads would have a very different feel though I can't help but think would be a bit of an unusual choice for fielding that many Space Marines on the board that don't really have enormous defense for the cost. At 18 points per 2 wound Space Marine profile, there's a lot of things that kill them quite quickly. I guess they would almost certainly survive, so they could blood surge at least if you took 20. Otherwise for their stat line, they move 8 inches now rather than 6. A few World Eaters units had their movement boosted to compensate for the loss of the blessings that make them go faster, and they get OC2, so have more weight on objectives than most things in the army. For their damage profile, there was a bit of bad news here. Basically, Khorne Berzerkers don't hit quite as hard as they used to before. First up, World Eaters units seem to have deteriorated in their marksmanship a bit. They only hit on a 4+ for their pistol attacks, and you can take 3 plasma pistols in the unit, though maybe feels a little bit more questionable overcharging them if you're only hitting on a 4+. You still have the chance of killing one of your Berzerker models and denying them their fun melee. Melee combat is definitely the main emphasis of them though, and again they have had a perhaps surprising nerf there. Each regular Berzerker is only 4 attacks at strength 4, AP-1, damage 1 at their base profile, and then you get 1 Eviscerator per 5 models, and that's at 3 attacks at strength 8, AP-2 and damage 2, and will definitely be doing a bit of carrying against heavy infantry and some chip damage against vehicles. The strength 4 does feel a bit intuitively wrong for them to me. They've had a boosted strength characteristic for a very long time in Warhammer 40k now. It just feels a bit odd that by their core datasheets they're only hitting as hard as assault intercessors. In reality though, they will get some inbuilt buffs because they have the blessings of Khorne. I feel like without the movement ones, the damage ones are going to be a lot more commonly go-tos. So you could have sustained hits, lethal hits, or devastating wounds against infantry, or some combination of those depending on how you roll. It does feel like they're going to be more dependent on detachment buffs for their damage output though, particularly the Berzerker Warband for the +2 strength and +1 attack, though Goretrack Onslaught can get them lance as well. Just for their damage output at base, here's what you can expect out of 10 Khorne Berzerkers. They might be 180 points if Games Workshop keep them the same as the printed in Codex points, though they might change them in the digital update. In any case, with their current profile without any buffs, they absolutely obliterate light infantry, 15 dead termagants, but only kill around about 5 enemy space marines on the charge, and do a fair bit worse against tougher stuff, maybe 1 or 2 slain terminators, and around 3-ish wounds to vehicles of different flavours. For the blessings of Khorne, these are the buffs that they can get there. There's 3 kind of utility ones: re-rolling charge rolls, a 6-inch pile-in and consolidate, and fights on death on a 4+. It does feel that with those being the rivals, there's going to be a few more choices of just raw damage dealing, with sustained hits 1, lethal hits, and devastating wounds against infantry on offer. And depending on the opponent, you could go for one of them or the other depending on how you roll the dice. Looking at their damage output with a couple of possible buffs, if you manage to roll well on the blessings and you get both sustained and lethal hits on the go, they do punch up a fair bit better against tough stuff. More like 7 slain space marines, around about 8 wounds to a toughness 10 tank, or 2 or 3 slain terminators. If they just had the Berzerker Warband buff for +1 attack and +2 strength when they're on the charge, that gets kind of more or less similar numbers. It's worse than the lethal hits against things like Land Raiders, but a bit better against terminators. And potentially on a good turn of charging you might be able to stack both of them, I guess. So +1 attack, +2 strength, sustained and lethal hits, and that gives the unit around about 10 slain space marines, 4 or 5 dead terminators, 1 slain normal sized battle tank, or around 7 wounds or so to a land raider. All these are a bit theory heavy though, and some things could make them better or worse. You could have taken casualties, or you might not be able to get all of the unit into fights. You might be able to flex out to devastating wounds, which could be a bit better against terminators, at least more so than lethal hits in the Berzerker Warbands. There's some other stratagems that can help them out. A Berzerker Warband has an extra AP one, which would be a big deal against a bunch of targets here. And you might have a character in the unit as well, particularly adding Khorne the Betrayer in, it takes them to the next level. Otherwise, for special rules in their datasheets, they get an icon of Khorne. These work a bit differently, and now they only trigger if you destroy a unit, and then if you do, you put a dice aside, and you get to roll that as an extra one next time you make a blessings roll, so hopefully it could help guarantee the ones that you need, or give you a higher chance to res Angron if that's what you're shooting for. Really though, the rule that absolutely dominates their datasheet is the Blood Surge. This one was a thing that they had before, but it now got quite a lot better. You get d6 plus 2-inch movement as soon as the enemy is shot and killed a model, and you must move as close as possible towards the nearest enemy unit. As with other surge moves, you can only do 1 per phase, but if you roll well, potentially that could be 8 inches towards the nearest enemy, and you can use that to get an engagement range, so opponents can't actually know that they're 100% safe from being essentially intervened into, unless they're a big 9 inches or more away. It means that Khorne Berzerkers are just going to be a really annoying opponent to fight on mid-board objectives. If you can stay just completely away from them and just gun them down, then it might not be a big deal at all. But if you want to fight for an objective and claim it, you might have Berzerkers jumping into melee with one of your shooting units, and perhaps stopping any other firepower that you wanted to shoot the big scary squad with. Or you might have them jumping into melee with one of your melee units so they can't charge. And due to the order of activations, it often mean that the Khorne Berzerkers might be able to activate before your unit if they haven't charged, at least unless you have another unit that can also countercharge them and swing first. It is definitely a bit on the random side, but for big 10-man squads or even 20-man squads, this could make them painful to deal with, particularly for ranged armies, perhaps having to play keep away for a turn or two, or think very carefully about how they're going to approach them and whether or not they can even afford to. Overall, between all that, some pros and cons on their datasheet, an enormous blood surge move, and a good movement characteristic, but their damage output isn't quite so good without buffs anymore, and they have had some changes to their support rules and units as well. Speaking of which, to get them into the fight, they can use a World Eater's Rhino. World Eater's vehicles have had some fun changes. Again, they only hit on 4s, but plenty of their weapons gained rapid fire, including big scary ones. The Rhino only really gets it on their combi bolter though. Though it's quite fun that they have far boosted melee profiles compared with most vehicles. Even the standard Rhino gets 6 attacks hitting on a 3+. For the Khorne Berzerkers though, it's a cheap and effective, durable transport vehicle. When they're jumping out of it, that'll essentially be a plus 3 inches to their threat range. And it's got an interesting special rule, where if enemies end a move within 9 inches, units inside can get out. I feel like most of the time you wouldn't really want to, just keep the unit safe and use the springboard movement next turn, but could have some niche use such as swinging objectives, maybe setting up a heroic intervention, or perhaps baiting an enemy into shooting them and blood surging them, though that is within the opponent's control. Definitely gives you one interesting option at least. I still guess that these would be the way that Berzerkers would want to get into battle, particularly 10 of them with a character attached. Speaking of characters though, they've had some big changes to those. The Master of Executions is sort of a generic on-foot character that can lead them. He's got a fairly similar damage profile to what he had before, 5 attacks at strength 7, AP 2, damage 2, with devastating wounds, precision, and rerolls against character-led units. He definitely adds some raw hitting power that'll help out against tough stuff for the squad that seems to be a little bit slanted towards light things. He has had the drastic nerf of no longer giving his unit fight first though, so basically he's going to be an extra cheap character to add in for melee damage, and the unit's not going to be quite as hard to deal with as it was. Instead of that, he just allows you to reroll advances and blood surge moves, which definitely isn't nothing and could increase that threat range a bit, but feels like the only really reliable thing that he adds for you is his damage profile now. He's still the character of choice if you want to put an enhancement in the unit though and transport them in a Rhino. It might emphasise Khorne as perhaps the bigger winner for leading Khorne Berzerkers and Rhinos. He's not really changed too much, and his Codex printed points are a bit cheaper than the pre-Codex ones, so fingers crossed that'll still be the case when the digital points go live. Gorechild's gone up to strength 7, so potentially strength 9 in the Berzerker Warband when he gets the charge. That could be 9 attacks with strength 9, AP 2 and damage 3, which would go through a whole bunch of Terminators. Never mind the fact that he gets reroll hits and wounds of 1 for his lead unit as well. Both big for his own melee damage output, and adds essentially a plus 36% damage increase to Berzerker units too. He does still have his fun but unfortunate tendency of offing friendly Berzerkers as well, and swaps to a more useful 2+ chance to revive on death as his bonus rule. If he really is a bit cheaper, he's certainly looking like he adds more to the unit than the Master of Executions now, at least outside of certain enhancements. Otherwise for leaders, the Juggernaut characters can also lead them. I guess that's if you're not in a transport. The Lord on Juggernaut boosts them to a movement 10, and now he's able to go through terrain pieces, so he isn't going to slow down the Berzerkers or force them to move around terrain like he previously did. His other special rule allows you to fight things within 3 inches in the fight phase, so basically pile in and fight within 2 ranks, which could be good for a 20-man Berzerker squad, at least in theory land. Still feels like he's not maybe adding a crazy amount of value to the squad, a slightly boosted threat range, and a slight support for Horde-style units. His own damage output I think will be a lot more interesting if it's sort of higher strength, higher damage and higher AP, as that's what the Berzerkers struggle with. Finally for leader choices, there's Lord Invocatus. He's got a slightly more threatening melee profile with some devastating wounds added in. He can give the Berzerkers deep strike alongside him if you want to, and they can move over and through enemy models too, but don't get the 10-inch move here. Otherwise he has some mortal wound impact hits, which he borrowed off the regular Juggernaut Lord. Again, he maybe just doesn't feel like he adds as much specific to them now though, as he no longer has his Scouts rule that allows him to confer that to other units. So maybe feels like he's lost a bit of his identity in a similar sort of way to the Master of Executions. Overall, between all that, I think I'd be most tempted by Khorne the Betrayer, provided he's at a reasonable points cost, and maybe a Master of Executions if you want a cheap fighty character that can bear enhancements. Next up, let's move on to the Berzerker Warband. This one's the reinterpretation of the Index Detachment, fairly general purpose to World Eaters, though there are some things that help out Berzerkers specifically. The core rule for this detachment is Relentless Rage. It's certainly still one of the stronger detachment rules, +2 strength and +1 attack in a turn in which units charged, applied to everything. Maybe feeling like it is going hand in hand with a couple of World Eaters units losing strength, including those Khorne Berzerkers, I guess the 8-bound as well, even if they got some anti-keywords. Overall, it would still mean that in this detachment, Khorne Berzerkers would still hit at strength 6, at least on the turns when they can get the charge. It's definitely a good start power-wise. Then for stratagems for the detachment, first up for 1 command point, there's Blood Offering. This one affects World Eaters that are slain on an objective that you control, and you basically mark that objective and you get sticky objectives on that until the opponent controls it at the end of any phase. In general, that is pretty nice for World Eaters' aggressive playstyle, charge onto objectives, kill things that are there, and then if the opponent just wipes them out in shooting, maybe not wanting to get too close to blood-surging Khorne Berzerkers or any of your other melee nastiness, you can still potentially be controlling objective even when everything's dead on it. Quite nice with Jackals as well, as if the opponent doesn't shoot them down, you still got sticky objectives on things. For 1 command point, there's Hack and Slash. This is an extra AP -1 in melee for a unit that's made a charge. It goes really well with the detachment rule, and this one certainly stands out for Khorne Berzerkers with a whole flurry of kind of low AP weapons. Hard to go too far wrong with that on a whole bunch of units though. For 2 command points, there's Frenzied Resilience, that's -1 damage in the fight phase, and that's a big expensive one. You wouldn't be able to use that all the time, but it could be really big against damage 2 or damage 3 attacks, maybe particularly for bigger models like 8-band or Angron where it makes the difference. Could be nice on Khorne Berzerkers as well though, say damage 2 attacks that are wiping out an individual model per hit. Having those be half as effective could be really big in a pinch. Kind of a shame it doesn't work against shooting attacks though. Next up, for 1 command point, there's Skulls for the Skull Throne. After killing a character or monster in the fight phase, roll the blessing dice, and then you can spend them on 1 extra blessing of your choice, and then that lasts until the end of the battle round. This one's a bit more niche than it was before, given that previously you could trigger it whenever you fought and killed any units, not just monsters or characters. It's definitely potentially big though to have a big game-wide buff, ideally killing something early in the fight phase potentially, and then you could activate more damage buffs for other units on the board, or maybe use it to get the boosted consolidation if that's going to be a big factor, or even the fights on death if you think that's going to be a thing. Kind of a shame that you can't use it to flex into the Feel No Pain though, and potentially prevent a whole bunch of damage from the enemy. For 1 command point, there's Apoplectic Frenzy, and this one's a Khorne Berzerker specific one, basically allowing them to advance and charge, though weirdly enough it sounds like you trigger it just before you've rolled the advance roll, when they're selected to advance, so you don't actually get to see the result to see how impactful it's going to be. Still though, it's definitely interesting as one of the only advances and charges in the Codex now, and given that they move 8 inches and could be disembarking 3 inches at the front of a Rhino, that could lead to a very long charge with them indeed, maybe an average 21 or 22 inch threat range or so. Finally, for 1 command point, there's Berzerker's Wrath, and again this one's very specific to Khorne Berzerkers. You get an automatic 8-inch Blood Surge move rather than rolling for it, so basically if your opponent's within 9 inches then you just walk into melee with them. That would certainly have to make opponents think about where they put models. The Khorne Berzerker units could basically deny you moving into fairly enormous sections of the board if the opponent can't afford to be locked up in melee. I guess you wouldn't get your +1 attack and +2 strength from the detachment rule for intervening into melee there, but it's still really big. Overall feels like some good stratagems, plenty of them supporting Berzerkers rather well. The extra AP one's really easy to use, the Blood Offerings one is good for sacrificial units, the Blessings one is a bit more niche, but when it triggers it can be big. And then both Advance and Charge and Blood Surge means Berzerkers are a lot more likely to make melee with things that they want, and does seem good support for them. Then finally for the enhancement, we've got the Berzerker Glaive. This one's 25 points printed, +1 attack and +1 damage to the bearer's melee weapons. It's pretty well unchanged from the index, aside from not affecting extra attack type weapons. Definitely a solid melee boost to a fighty character, whether it's a Master of Executions or Demon Prince or something. The Helm of Brazen Ire gives you a -1 damage, that's pretty strong on a Demon Prince, though not quite as strong as the index version when it was half damage. Battle Lust is 10 points, and this allows you to reroll charges, or gives you a +1 to charges if you already have that active from the blessings. Previously this one was a 0 CP Heroic Intervention one which rarely got used. I guess reroll charges could save you a command reroll or two, but it doesn't feel like a particularly pivotal one to have. Could just add a touch of reliability to that squad, maybe nice enough as a points filler. And then finally we've got the new version of the Favoured of Khorne, printed at 15 points, and this means that each time you've got a Blessings of Khorne roll on the go, you can re-roll 2 of the dice out of the roll, rather than re-rolling the entire thing once per game. And that is pretty good odds if you want to fish for the higher numbers, or trying to get Angron back. Quite nice that works every round now. Maybe the biggest issue with it is that you just have to have a character that's out of a transport and sat around surviving as opposed to throwing himself into the enemy. Maybe it still could be interesting for something like a Lone Juggernaut Lord or Demon Prince providing command benefits. Depends whether the overall spend on the character is worth using it in that way. Overall still some pretty usable enhancements though. I do quite like the Favoured of Khorne one. The extra damage is nice and the defense seems alright for a Demon Prince. Generally speaking, I wouldn't say it's changed enormously in power from the index. I feel like the main changes have more come from the changes to the Blessings of Khorne. This detachment actually gives you extra strength on the charge now, which isn't the worst thing, but it doesn't offer quite so much general purpose movement now. Being able to combo a 6-inch auto advance and charge on anything was kind of mad, and that seems to be part of the whole Khorne thing and getting a little bit slower. It still looks like it's probably going to be the best detachment if you actually want to run Berzerkers though in good numbers. The damage buff makes their chain blades way more relevant. They'll like the extra AP stratagem, and then they've got 2 good stratagems specific to them with Advance and Charge and the big Blood Surge. Otherwise, for other detachment things, it feels like one of the other best ones would be the Gortrak Onslaught one. Again, this one feels fairly Berzerker focused, given that loads of the stratagems affect Rhinos, and their use is to transport Berzerkers into battle. Again, like the Berzerker Warband, it can give you some extra damage that's much needed for them. Units that disembark from transport vehicles get a +1 to charge rolls, and they also have the Lance keyword if they make a charge that turn, so +1 to wound on Khorne Berzerkers would be quite nice. In theory, you could get it on other units as well, but that would require a Land Raider. Feels like between Lance and potentially the combos of sustained and lethal hits as well, that could get you some very hard-hitting Berzerkers, and a fair few of the other stratagems are sort of mobility and charge delivery focused. There's one for a move drop charge with a Rhino, one for jumping out of a Rhino 6 inches and potentially doing that straight into close combat if you're fearing Overwatch. There's again a kind of ludicrously scary one for a 1 command point Blood Surge out of a transport, so the transport gets shot, the Khorne Berzerkers get out, and then they Blood Surge, which effectively is 5 inches plus d6 inches plus engagement range to get into melee. So again, it's going to be very hard to keep Berzerkers away from your lines there. And this one also has a single-use Fights First enhancement as well, so you could put that on a Master of Executions. And again, that seems very nice for a Berzerker unit that's maybe jumped out of a transport on an objective and the opponent wants to try and take off that with a close combat squad. I feel like there's enough here to be interesting, though it's definitely very dependent on Berzerkers being outright strong to carry the army. Finally, for other detachments, there's a few more things. The Possessed and the Cultist ones don't do so much. For the Demonkin though, there's a good Lance melee and potentially also Twin Linked for the same unit as well. That second bit, if you can activate the relevant Blood Tithe bit, that certainly feels like a recipe to make any World Eaters unit just absolutely monstrous in close combat, Berzerkers included. There's a 1 command point 1 for an invulnerable save, a 5+ invulnerable going to a 4+ if you've activated the buff. The second bit in particular could be great for Berzerkers, and there's a good damage relic that could be nice for the Master of Executions too. Then finally the Grotmus Vessels of Wrath have the potential to get yourself a free blessing if you nominate their squad. There's a command point for a +1 strength, an extra AP which again would work great for them, reroll wound rolls versus monsters and vehicles, and a -1 to wound stratagem as well. Again, definitely supporting the Berzerkers a bit better than some of the detachments do. Feels like they're viable enough to use in any of those. They feel far more central to the Berzerker Warband and the Goretrack Onslaught compared with these two. Overall though, I'll certainly be interested to hear your takes as to the new Khorne Berzerker datasheets and their updated Berzerker Warband. Generally the World Eaters changes don't tend to have made people too impressed with Games Workshop on this one. I feel like the -1 strength they got is a bit of a feels bad one, and the datasheet is a bit weirdly dependent on Blood Surge to be good now, so extra annoying on mid-board objectives and giving your opponent headaches, but maybe not quite as much raw hitting power or just charging into the fray and doing stuff as you might hope for. Obviously it's all very points dependent. Hopefully Khorne the Betrayer still stays at a low points cost, as I think him plus a unit of Khorne Berzerkers in a Rhino would be pretty monstrous, particularly with Blood Surge on the go. And hopefully they could be hitting just a little bit harder than people might anticipate, if you're now able to mainly focus on the damage dealing blessings of Khorne as opposed to going for the movement ones. Fingers crossed Games Workshop managed to keep them balanced so they'll be part of a strong World Eaters army. Even with Strength 4, I feel like they will be at the right points cost. I certainly wouldn't be crazy surprised if in a future balance update they decided to raise the strength on them a bit though. I guess we'll see. In any case, I'll leave that there for now. As mentioned, feel free to check out the channel's affiliate discount retailers linked in the video description if you'd like to help support. A big thank you to anyone using those when they pick things up. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll hopefully be aiming to finish the World Eaters Codex review within the day, so subscribe or check back later if you'd like to see that. Finally, if you've been enjoying all the videos on the channel does have a Patreon page as well if you'd like to support. Patrons getting a few advantages such as seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways. If any of that sounds good or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.